Hi there, I'm Ken Lammers. Welcome back to Commonplace Catholic, episode 3. Today we're going to discuss monks. And I don't mean Tony Shalhoub, for those of you who were watching TV back in the 90s, I guess. And I understand that some people in the United States, particularly the monks, have a depth of knowledge about this. But what I find is that most people, even Catholics, including me, have a limited knowledge in this area. So I thought I would try my best. I'm sure I'll make some mistakes. Try my best to explain for those of us that are Catholics and those of you who are Protestants about what a monk is and what they do. So let's get going.
Lord Jesus Christ.
युगान युग तेरा ही है.
Ilekroć bowiem sprawujemy pamiątkę ofiary Chrystusa,
Kweli ni vema na haki tukushukuru daima na popote, Bwana Baba mwema.
主の御体と御血になりますように。
Okay, so to start out, you have to understand that there are two basic types of monks. And underneath those two types, there are what are called orders. And orders are organizations of monks within the two types. One type of monk is called a contemplative monk, or a monastic monk, right? These are the monks who generally go out and build a monastery, an abbey, whatever you want to call it, in the mountains or in the woods, and stay away from the rest of secular society so they can work, pray, work, and pray, right? This is their basic life. They work hard for Christ, they pray hard for Christ and for the rest of us, and that's what they're doing. Uh, yeah. Amongst these groups are, and these are also the ones that you'll hear people talking about vows of silence. I think many of these groups value science or silence, contemplative silence, but I'm not sure how many of them actually take an absolute vow. Okay, the two groups here that we most all know about are the Benedictines, the oldest group of monks, period, and at least in the Western Rite, and the Trappists, which the Benedictines actually are technically their name is the Order of Saint Benedict, and the Trappists though I'm going to read this because otherwise I'll get it wrong. Their actual name is the Order of Cistercians of the Strict Observance. Okay, um, and they are the ones that are in contemplative monastic living, right? The other group are the mendicants, and these are the people, and often you will hear monks that are mendicants called a friar instead of a monk, right? It's kind of a way to separate them out, I guess. And for those of you who don't recall what a friar is, if you're old enough that you were actually taught Western civilization mythos, like Robin Hood, Friar Tuck was apparently a mendicant. Although I don't remember them actually laying out what order he was in. But of course, the mendicants have different orders too. Generally, what the mendicants are is they are required to live in poverty, not own anything themselves. What few things they are allowed to use, they are given by their abbot, the person who runs their group. And they are to live in poverty. They are to serve, right? And generally, the poor and the impoverished and the needy, and try to help them to come to Christ, and I guess the rest of us to come to Christ, and the church and the Trinity and all, right? And that is really their purpose. Among these, the three groups that I know of, and there's four actually that are the real major ones, to the best of my knowledge. And I'm going to read these because they each have like a different name with them. Okay, there's the Franciscans. We probably all heard of Franciscans. That's the Order of Friars Minor. And I think there are like a number of different types of break-off groups from the Franciscans. It's like almost its own Protestant thing. This group broke from that, and broke from this, and broke from that. There's the Dominicans, whose actual name is the Order of Preachers. The Carmelites, whose actual name is the Order of the Brothers of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Mount Carmel. And I'd heard of all those, right? Specifically the Franciscans and Dominicans I'd heard of. The Carmelites I'd kind of heard of. I'm not sure I've ever run into a Carmelite. I'm not sure I've run into a Franciscan. I'm not sure I've run into any of these, but I know about those three. There's a fourth that's called the Augustinians, and their actual official title is Hermits of St. Augustine. So those are the ones that fall into the mendicant groups, the ones that are supposed to live poor, live in the cities and the urban areas to bring us all closer to Christ, right? That's their job. And all of them, whether or not they're monks in the contemplative group or friars in the mendicant group, are basically living in poverty. They're not supposed to own anything themselves, etc., etc. I am sure that somebody will correct me in the comments that there are a bunch of different rules about how this works, and different ones have different things that they do. I know this. I'm being very general to explain. So let me explain a couple of things. First of all, the general accepted term, if you run into a monk or a friar, when you address them, is Brother John, Brother Calvin, well probably not Calvin, Brother Joseph, that sort of thing. You call them brother. They're not fathers. Some of them can be priests, but generally the correct term, if somebody in a robe walks up to you, you say, "What can I do for you today, brother?" Right? That's just like with nuns, which are the female version of monks, right? You call them sister, right? Brothers and sisters. And of course, the respectful term when it's a priest is father. But each one of these orders that I've talked about lives under something called a rule. Now, the rule is really a set of, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a set of rules that they live under, right? And each of them, well, not each of them has a different one. I will say the ones that are in contemplative monks have basically, I think, tend to follow the rule of Saint Benedict, right? Starting with the Benedictines and Trappists and whomever else is in there. And on the other side, when you get the mendicant orders, they all seem to have their own set of rules. Like the Franciscans, not too shockingly, follow the rule of St. Francis. The Dominicans actually follow the rule of St. Augustine. It's a little bit different. Apparently, the history behind that is they went to go form their group, and they went to the Pope, and he said, "Well, that's fine. You can have a group, but you ain't making your own rules up. You got to adopt somebody else's." And they went back and figured out, well, looking at them all, we're going to do the rule of St. Augustine because it is the shortest, sweetest, in their opinion, best rule, right? Okay, the Carmelites follow the rule of St. Albert, and the Augustinians, again, not so shockingly, follow the rule of St. Augustine. So they all have their rules that they follow, what they have to live by, what they have to live up to, and that sort of thing. Now, these different groups have founded at different times in the church's history, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The Benedictines were the first. What happens a lot of times is, right, a number of abbeys form under the Benedictines, right? And as happens whenever you have humans, this group over here is doing this group over here is doing something different. They can't agree on how it's to be done, right? And of course, there's always people who go off here on the side and are doing wrong things and still stay in, right? How you end up with the Trappists, as I understand it, was there was a group of Benedictines who thought that the original monks and monastery had gotten too lax. It was just being too lax about things, so they broke off and they founded the Cistercians. There may be a bigger name for them, but the Cistercians. And I'm not sure if they're still going, how it is. Like I said, there's a million, well, not a million, but there's a lot of different types of orders of monks out there. Well, the Cistercians are out there and they're forming their abbeys and their monasteries. And another group decides, well, they're just not doing it. They're not being strict enough in it. And they break away and become, I read their whole name to you, it's of the Cistercians of strict observance. So they become their own group. They become what we call the Trappists, right? So that's kind of the way this happens. I think it happens the same way in the Mendicants. Dominicans may have some broke off. So I understand that the Franciscans have a whole bunch of different groups that break off, and I'm not sure about the Carmelites and the Augustinians. Okay, so that's that you end up with a bunch of different types of monks out there, a bunch of different orders, although they're all moving towards God. Let's talk about the Benedictines. These are the ones that probably have the most presence on in media and stuff like that, because while the Benedictines are supposed to be a monastic order, they're also the ones that are out there to fight Satan. I mean, this is like their given purpose. Well, it's not written into the order, I don't think. Maybe it is, but their order's like 73 chapters long. It's a nice little read. They are the very first monastic order, at least in the Western Rite, but they're the first one, and these are the ones that, again, you got problems and you think that your baby sister needs an exorcism. These are the people you go to, right? So they're not entirely living in the monastery, and outside of what I'm just talking about there, which is known because it's shown in TV shows and movies and stuff. Outside of what's there, they also do other things out in the world. For instance, I know that there's a high school in Richmond, Virginia, that's run by the Benedictines, right? So that's there. I've even been to it once. I went there because they supposedly had a really good Catholic, gift / bookstore, right, in the school. And I went there because it's in the South, it's in Richmond. You're not finding a whole bunch of Catholic stuff. So I go there, and I was going to buy a crucifix. I don't remember what I went looking for, but I ended up, I'm going to buy a crucifix. I'm going to buy this really pretty, well-built crucifix. And the monk who was working the shop basically, well, I won't say he guilted me into it, but when a monk says, you really should think about buying this one. And he pointed at one of the ones with the St. Benedict medal on the back behind Jesus on the crucifix, and just kind of stood there. And he didn't push me any further than that, but you're kind of like, okay, I'll buy that one, right? And I think it's the one I have up here. Nope, it's not. I have it in the house here somewhere. It's on one of the walls in one of my rooms in here. But so it was I ended up buying that. So I know they're out in the world doing things, right? They're not totally closed off behind the doors of the monastery. So it's not 100% thou shalt not do anything out in the world, right? But I think it's mostly supposed to be that way. Mostly supposed to be contemplative, God willing. And then, like, we end up in the Mendicants. And like I say, the people that you and I know about mostly in the Mendicants are probably going to be the Franciscans and the Dominicans, right? You probably those. As I understand it, the Dominicans were very big in Spanish expansion, right? The Franciscans are known, if for no other reason, we all know who St. Francis is. He's the guy that they always show with all the birds and the little critters with him and everything, right? I mean, forget the fact that he lived an ascetic lifestyle and dedicated himself entirely to God. We're going to remember him because, the critters liked him. Okay? So those are the ones that we really kind of remember. And let me kind of give you what's the difference. I've given you a difference about how they live and act, but you end up with different rules and different rules how they have to live under. So, for instance, the contemplative orders, the Benedictines, the Trappists, and that, they live under the rule of Saint Benedict. This is 73 chapters long, and it covers everything from the clothes that they're supposed to wear to the fact that they're not supposed to eat if they go out from the monastery for less than a day without permission from the abbot, uh, to how you're going to pray, when you're going to pray, what prayers you're going to say at night, that sort of thing, and basic things about how you're supposed to pray to God and obey and live in silence as best as possible and that sort of thing, right? 73 chapters of this. It's pretty complex for as far as it goes. I mean, again, it's not like you're looking at the modern code of a state or the federal government, which is incredibly over complex. But it's fairly complex. And I'll tell you, I looked through the Order of Saint Benedict, and I'm going to kind of go through it a little bit and tell you a little bit of what I found. Like chapter 4, what are the instruments of good work? Instruments of good work. I suggest anybody read that. It is a list of things that you do good in the world. And then there's 5 concerning obedience, 6 concerning silence, 7 concerning humility. These are the ways you live under this rule to make yourself a better man and to make yourself better able to pray to God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and all that, and bring help to yourself, your abbey, the world, right? Okay, so then you get things like, again, Rule 51, concerning brethren who do not go far away. This is the rule that says if you leave for less than a day, you're not allowed to eat anything on the outside without permission from the abbot. Rule 64, how you elect the abbot, who's the guy who's going to run your monastery, right? And then the things, it even gets down to minuscule things like Rule 55, concerning the brethren's clothing and shoes. What clothes a monk can wear, right? And they're orders following this, right? So, and obviously you've got the Benedictines, and I've already talked to them a little bit, and then you got orders that thought, well, they aren't being strict enough on these, and and then orders that thought they weren't being strict enough on those, and you end up with a Trappist, and I don't know exactly how they differently apply them. Obviously, the Trappists thought they needed to apply them more strictly. Apparently, they do. I don't know. So, and then you end up with, like, let's talk about what the Dominicans are under. The Rule of St. Augustine. This is short, right? It is 13 chapters, and I've read it, and it is very short. It is, and we're not talking chapters with sub-chapters and sub-sub-chapters. I mean, each one's like a paragraph or two or something like that, right? You get through it pretty quickly. Okay, now let me read off what the heads of these chapters are. Purpose and basis of the common life, that's 1. 2 is prayer. 3 is moderation and self-denial. 4 is safeguarding chastity and fraternal correction. 5 is the care of community goods and treatment of the sick. 6 is asking pardon and forgiving offenses. 7 is governance and obedience. And 8 is observance of the rule, of this rule, basically. So that's what you got, and that's pretty quick. And like I say, it is a lot less to it than like 2, right? When St. Dominic set this up and he started sending out the rule to various groups of friars in Dominicans, he also apparently, and you can find this story in several places, I have, said, look, if any of you really start rule lawyering so that you're just really, really, sticking to the rule and to the, not paying attention to other things and being silly about this, I will come and burn your copy of the rule. And of course, this is back in the day when things were handwritten by somebody, right? So that's a serious threat then. Now you just get another copy off the internet, right? But then that was a serious threat. You had to have that. That's what showed you what you were doing. This is back in the day, right? When they would have the one Bible in the church, chained in the church so that nobody could steal it because it was worth a lot. Because, again, somebody had written the whole thing out by hand. That was hard, and hard to replace. But so this is what they live by. I'm not sure I've actually met anybody from either of these groups, right? Either of these orders. I do kind of have in my head a stereotype, which I'm sure is wrong in many, many ways, of these. A stereotype of Dominicans as being kind of more serious and more dedicated, more down to earth, and more maybe scholarly and that sort of thing. Um, and I have in my head a stereotype of Franciscans as being very strong in the faith and very dedicated to helping others, trying to bring them into the faith, making them very strong in the faith, but not necessarily being the best at theology, right? Not really being the ones who I would go to if I had a serious theological point to discuss, right? All about bringing people to God. We're going to bring people to God. We're going to bring people to God. But if I'm going to have an argument on something with a Protestant and I want somebody to fill me in on the knowledge, I don't know if I'm going to a Franciscan, right? Uh, that's the stereotype. I am very sure, as I'm sure people will point out in the comments, that they're all this and that Franciscan was well studied and really educated and really brilliant. I'm sure of that. I'm just telling you kind of what the stereotype is, and at least it is in my head, and as I've been raised in a Catholic family, what kind of we thought. Okay, so that's a broad overview about monks, what they do, what the different groups are, what kind of their stereotypes are. It's interesting. Here's an interesting fact that I hadn't thrown in at this point. The mendicant monks, the the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, was initially among the mendicant monks and then moved out after a period of time. Not sure why. Don't know the reason for that, but I do know it happened. Be interesting to know the history of that. I'll see if I can find it. Anyway, that's it for today. We've gone through all the like a broad overview of monks, monasteries, friars, and their business in the real world, dealing with the secular folks, and all that. And I hope it's given you a little bit of knowledge. So that's it for today. As I've said every week, there is no imprimatur here. I am not backed by any bishop or approved by any bishop, priest, cardinal, monsignor, not the pope, definitely, or anybody, right? I don't expect the Inquisition to break in any second, right? But I'm not going to tell you that if you start quoting this back to your priest, he's not going to go, that's not exactly right. So look it up yourself and become more knowledgeable. With that said, I think I'm going to call it a day. Until next week, go with God, folks. Bye now.